Hi everyone, and welcome to Horror Spectator. If you're new here, consider subscribing. We dive deep into the darkest, most chilling real-life horror stories out there. And if you're a returning viewer, I'm so glad to have you back, friend. In this video, I'm sharing 3 stories that have stayed with me ever since I first came across them. The first one really got to me. It's genuinely terrifying. And maybe that's because something kind of similar happened to me when I was a teenager. Maybe one day I'll share that story with you. The second one is just as disturbing, if not even more, and it's a strong reminder of how dangerous remote areas can be, even if you're well prepared. A close friend of mine actually went through something very similar while cycling out in Utah, so this one hit close to home too. And then there's the third story. Honestly, it's one of the most puzzling ones I've ever received. I've tried digging into it, looking for anything that could confirm it. But so far, nothing. It was definitely a great read, and that's why I decided to share it here on the channel. But I have no idea if it's real. If you've heard anything about it, let me know. I'd love to go deeper into that one. Remember, viewer discretion is advised. I've always thought there's a difference between being alone and being isolated. Being alone can feel peaceful, freeing even, like a choice you made to step away from the noise for a while. But isolation is something else entirely, something you don't choose, something that creeps in slowly until suddenly you realize there's no one coming, no one watching, no one who even knows where you are. And that realization hit me hard sometime during the 3rd night of our hiking trip deep in the Appalachian backcountry, when the forest around us, which had felt so neutral and indifferent until then, suddenly started to feel like it had a presence, like it was observing us, judging our every move. And I know that might sound dramatic or paranoid, but the change was so subtle and undeniable that it stuck with me, and I can't shake the feeling even now. But let me start from the beginning. There were 6 of us, close friends with a shared history of backpacking and late-night planning sessions fueled by cheap beer and too much confidence. And we'd picked this trail specifically because it wasn't listed on most of the updated park maps. It was older, more remote, something Kyle had found on a forum for experienced hikers only. And that should have been a red flag right from the beginning. But we were all a little too eager to prove we weren't like the average weekend campers with their coolers and Bluetooth speakers and GPS-tagged campsites. We wanted something real. We wanted to feel small. We wanted to disappear into the woods for a week and come back changed, or at least with stories to tell. The plan was simple enough. 7 days, 6 people, minimal gear, and a route that would loop us through the lesser-known ridges, past some rumored overlooked Civil War ruins, and eventually reconnect with a logging road where we'd get picked up. The first day went exactly as we'd hoped. Sunlight slicing through the treetops like golden wire, clean streams, wildlife keeping a respectful distance, and enough trail markers to make us feel like we weren't totally off-grid. We made good time, joked around, took turns leading, and by sunset we'd found a perfect little clearing to pitch our tents, with just enough elevation to keep the bugs at bay and a view that looked straight out of a National Geographic cover. That night we passed around a flask, told stories from our college days, and laughed until someone noticed the moon, full and clear and too bright to look at directly. I remember that because Kyle made a comment about how the woods feel different under a full moon, and we all gave him crap for trying to be spooky, but he just kind of shrugged and said, "I'm just saying, some places weren't made for people." By the 2nd day, we were deeper in. Cell signal had vanished completely, and we'd already crossed 2 streams and hiked up a rocky incline that had Marcus swearing and threatening to turn back, though we all knew he wouldn't. Alyssa had brought this little notebook where she was sketching trees and rocks and weird mushrooms we came across, some of which looked almost fake, like the colors were too saturated, too cartoonish to be real. And at one point she found this tiny skeleton under a mossy log, perfectly intact, like something had picked it clean and laid it there on purpose. But none of us could figure out what animal it had been. We joked it was a squirrel sacrifice or something stupid like that, and then moved on. It wasn't until the third night that I started noticing the silence. Not the regular kind of quiet you get in the woods after dark, but a full silence. The kind that feels deliberate, like a decision was made to stop all noise at once. And when I laid down in my tent that night, something about the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on me through the nylon walls. And I had this weird sensation that if I just opened the flap and looked out, something would be standing there. Not moving, not doing anything, just watching. But I didn't open the flap. I just stared at the ceiling of the tent until my eyes adjusted to the dark and let that feeling wrap itself around my chest like a cold rope, slowly tightening. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just nerves. Just my brain playing tricks on me. But part of me knew that something was different now. Something had changed. I swear I'm not trying to be that kind of person who says stuff like this. I've heard plenty of stories about remote places in the US, and every time someone started talking about how they could feel something shift in the air, or how there was this unnatural silence, I'd just roll my eyes. But I'm telling you, it's real. I was practically asleep, or in that weird in-between state where you've basically drifted off, when I heard a noise just outside the tent. Again, I can't explain why, but something in me knew instantly. It wasn't one of my friends. I didn't move for a full minute, just listened, trying to convince myself it had been a deer or a raccoon or maybe just my imagination. But then I remembered the small mesh window on the side of the tent, the one that pointed directly toward the forest. And something compelled me to crawl over and peek out, not out of fear, more out of curiosity, because I've always been a skeptic, especially when it comes to the Appalachians and all the stories people love to throw around about feral people and mysterious disappearances and strange cults living off-grid. I'd always chalked it all up to bored minds and exaggeration, so when I pulled back the flap and looked through that little window, I didn't expect to see anything at all. But instead, what I saw were eyes. Not animal eyes, not glowing like you'd expect from a deer or a fox, but maybe two human-looking eyes, low to the ground and perfectly still. Locked directly onto mine from between two trees, maybe 20 feet out. They didn't blink. They didn't flinch. Just stared. They were lower, almost like the person was lying flat on their stomach, hidden in the undergrowth, watching. But at the same time, it didn't feel like it was a person. And all of a sudden, those eyes didn't even look like eyes anymore. Was I imagining it? Despite the way my heart started to pound against my chest, I still told myself it wasn't anything real. That I was tired, that my brain was filling in blanks. But still, I unzipped the tent, stepped out barefoot onto the cold dirt, and started walking in that direction. I didn't grab a flashlight, just my phone. Didn't even put on shoes, just moved slowly toward the trees, thinking that maybe if I got close enough I'd see it was just a weird reflection or some animal I hadn't recognized. But after some time walking, the sound came. This deep, layered noise that I still don't have the words for. Not a growl or a whisper or anything you'd expect in a forest, but something that seemed to come from inside my head as much as outside it. Like a vibrating pressure that settled right behind my eyes and started to crawl down my spine, cold and thick, like it had weight. I stopped moving instantly, because whatever that sound was, it didn't feel like something I was supposed to hear. It felt invasive, like it wasn't just sound, but intent, like it was meant to dig into you and stay there. and I remember shaking, not from cold, but from this primal, unexplainable fear that something had looked straight into me. I ran back to the camp, and all I could say over and over was, "There's something out there," which of course woke everyone up. They sat up, groggy and confused, asking what the hell I was talking about. And when I told them what I saw, what I heard, they all laughed in that nervous way people laugh when they're trying to keep something from sinking in. When the truth is so heavy, it makes your mouth dry. They said I was messing with them, that I just wanted to scare everyone, that I must have been dreaming. But you could tell from the way no one was willing to go back to sleep right away, that they didn't believe their own words. And for the rest of the night, the energy in the camp shifted. Like we were all pretending everything was fine while our guts screamed otherwise. The next day was quiet. Too quiet. The woods didn't sound like woods anymore. There were no birds, no wind, just this constant, oppressive silence that seemed to follow us no matter how far we hiked. We kept looking over our shoulders, all of us pretending not to be paranoid, but everyone's head was on a swivel. Then came the fourth night, and that's when we all heard it. What I'd heard before. That low, vibrating hum that you couldn't describe as anything other than wrong. It came just after midnight, and one by one we all sat up in our sleeping bags. Eyes wide, breaths held, because we knew that the sound hadn't been in our heads. It was outside, it was real, and it was close. No one slept that night, not because of fear exactly, but because something in that sound made it physically impossible to close your eyes. Every time you tried, it was like your brain short-circuited, yanked you back into wakefulness, and by dawn, we were all hollow-eyed and on edge. That day, Marcus collapsed. At first, we thought it was a heart attack. He clutched his chest, went pale, started gasping like he couldn't breathe. We got him to lie down, tried to keep him calm. I grabbed my phone and climbed up the nearest ridge with Alyssa to try and get a signal. As soon as we reached a high enough point to get a single bar, I started dialing for help. But before I could even get through, there was something standing between two trunks, far enough that I couldn't make out a face, but close enough to know it was tall, and still, and not an illusion. We ran, slid down that slope faster than we should have, branches slapping our faces, nearly tripping over roots and rocks. When we got back to the group, we tried to stay as calm as possible. We didn't want Marcus's condition to get any worse, and we definitely didn't want anyone else spiraling like that. So we kept what we'd seen to ourselves, and just said help was on the way. It didn't take too long. 2.5 hours later, help had finally arrived. At the hospital, they told us it wasn't a heart attack. It was a full-blown panic attack, brought on by extreme stress and sleep deprivation. That's when it really hit me. None of us had slept in 2 nights. Not really. And every time we closed our eyes, we heard that noise. For 2 months after we got back, I couldn't sleep properly. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, covered in sweat, hearing that sound again, vibrating inside my skull like it was part of me now. Jessica didn't sleep for 4 nights straight, and ended up in the ER with what they called stress-induced insomnia. One by one, we all started unraveling, and no one wanted to admit that what we heard, what we felt, wasn't just fear. It wasn't just some mental breakdown. That sound, whatever it was designed to keep us awake, to break us down slowly. And when I think back to those eyes in the forest and that presence that felt like it had crawled inside my chest, I know we were never supposed to be there. I still don't know what hides in those mountains, but I'll never mock the stories again. And whatever it was that found us that night, it didn't need to chase us. It just needed to wait. Because sleep is what keeps us sane. And when you take that away, you don't have to kill someone to destroy them. You just have to keep them awake. What I'm about to tell you is deeply disturbing. At least, it was for me, and I honestly believe it will be for anyone who's ever experienced danger in remote mountain or forest areas, no matter where in the world. The reason I've decided to finally talk about this is because enough time has passed that I can tell the story without it keeping me up for nights on end. And second, because something eerily similar just happened to a friend of mine. I feel like it's incredibly important for people to be aware of what can happen in isolated areas, so they can take every possible precaution. More than anything, I want people to understand that this isn't some urban legend. These things actually happen, and staying alert can make all the difference. It happened about 7 years ago. My dad and I had planned to hike a section of the Appalachian Trail, specifically in northern Pennsylvania. We'd already done parts of that trail in previous years, but we'd left one part unfinished the year before. So that summer, we were determined to pick it back up. We both had a good amount of experience with hiking trails. Plenty of them, both together and on our own. Not this particular stretch, but many others across the US. It was early summer, and everything pointed to it being the perfect time to go. The nights were mild, and although the days were warm, the heat wasn't unbearable. But the problem started almost immediately. We hadn't even been walking for half an hour when my dad slipped helping a younger hiker over some rocks and got his foot stuck. It wasn't a serious injury, but it was obvious he wouldn't be able to continue, especially considering the mountainous terrain we were headed into. About halfway down the main trail, there was a fork that led off into an old, overgrown path that hadn't been used in years. It was known to be more difficult, and over time, there had been reports of people going missing there. At least 2 had been found dead. With my dad's injury, continuing down that path was out of the question. My immediate thought was to head back home with him, but he insisted, strongly, that I keep going on my own. I was going through a rough time in my life, and both my parents were worried about my mental health. My dad knew how much it would mean to me to complete the trail, both symbolically and emotionally. He pushed so hard that I finally agreed. I figured I'd shorten the distance a bit since I'd be alone, but I was set on finishing the hike. He turned back, and I kept moving forward. That first day, I ran into a few other hikers, including an old childhood friend I hadn't seen in years. Even though I was still a little shaken and annoyed by what had happened with my dad, as the day went on, that feeling gave way to a strange sense of peace. Around 5 in the afternoon, I reached the fork, the split between the newer, well-used trail and the old wild one that time had mostly erased. Let me say this. If you're not experienced, you should never leave the main trails. They're there for a reason. Safety, accessibility, and the ability to get help if needed. But like I said, I've got plenty of experience. And as beautiful as the main trails can be, they're nothing compared to the raw, untamed beauty of the wilder paths. I had been walking down that forgotten trail for about 45 minutes when I started thinking it was time to find a good spot to camp. The area I was in was still too sloped, so I kept going until I found flatter ground. Eventually, I came across a perfect spot to set up. For the next 2 days and nights, everything was absolutely ideal. Breathtaking views, birds singing, the sound of wind through the trees, nature at its purest. It was only when I started descending the other side of the mountain, heading back toward the main trail, that things began to go wrong. Even though I was on my way down, I knew I still had about 2 days of hiking left before I'd reach the safety of the main path. Halfway through the descent, I came across something that sent a chill through me. a shredded t-shirt, stained with what looked like blood. It was hanging from some branches, almost like it had been placed there intentionally, to be noticed. It was strange, unsettling. The truth is, if you spend time in the wilderness, you'll eventually cross paths with some weird people. 3 years earlier, I'd been robbed by a man right in the middle of the Pacific Crest Trail. The only reason I felt even somewhat safe was because I was armed, and properly armed. No one would mess with me easily. Just a year before this incident, a clearly strung-out man had tried to break into my tent. So at this point in my life, I didn't scare easily. I kept walking, and after a little while, I found a new place to set up camp. It was more overgrown than I would have liked, but it had good shade, was flat, and seemed protected. I set up the tent, got myself organized, and before I started cooking, boiling water to add to a freeze-dried meal, I decided to explore the area a bit. That's when I found something that really made me uneasy. Stretched low between two trees, there was a tripwire. It was hard to see, set just at ankle height, but high enough for someone to definitely trip on. I only noticed it because one of the trees had some strange markings on it, and when I bent down to look, the sun hit the wire and it shimmered. I cut it right away to avoid any accidents, whether mine or someone else's, and went back to camp. That was, without a doubt, a trap, set on purpose. And right then, something shifted inside me. I didn't just feel uneasy anymore. I was genuinely concerned. That kind of fear almost never hits me out there on the trails. I hadn't strayed far from my camp, so when I came back and saw my tent open, I immediately knew something was wrong. I was absolutely sure I'd closed it. And worse, my phone was gone. Someone had definitely been there. I grabbed my gun and scanned the area, and the question that hit me was, how? How did I not hear anything? No footsteps, no sound of the zipper. I'd only been a few steps away. I wasn't about to wait around for whoever that was to come back. I tore everything down quickly and kept moving, completely on high alert now. The tripwire and the missing phone were not coincidences. I hated the idea of walking through the forest at night, especially off-trail, but the thought of staying still terrified me more. I kept going until around midnight, when I finally stopped to eat something and listen to the woods. I was trying to hear any signs, footsteps, movement, anything. After about 15 minutes of silence, I convinced myself I'd gotten far enough away. Whoever it was must have lost me. I set the tent back up and tried to rest. Not sleep, just take the weight off. But I must have dozed off, because next thing I knew, it was morning. I got up and stepped out. That's when I saw the second truly terrifying thing. Right in front of my tent, stretched between two trees, was another wire. I was getting breakfast ready when I bent down to check the water and saw it glint in the sunlight again. My stomach dropped. I had pissed in that exact area during the night. I clearly remembered a mossy tree. That meant the wire hadn't been there before. It had been placed while I was sleeping. I followed it with my eyes and saw it was connected to a makeshift pulley, tied to a branch, leading up to a 5-liter metal container suspended by thin steel cables. The container was full of a strong-smelling chemical liquid. I stayed back, and out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement. Someone was watching me from the trees. I ran for the tent and saw a figure bolting in the opposite direction. I grabbed my gun and fired. At that point, I didn't care about consequences. Whoever it was clearly meant to harm me. I kept hearing him crash through the branches as he ran off. I quickly packed up whatever I could carry and started making my way down the trail toward the main path, fueled by pure adrenaline. The only thing that gave me some comfort was knowing that, whoever it was, they were a coward. They wanted to hurt me, but they didn't want to fight. They were looking to catch me off guard, to strike when I was vulnerable. Still, every survival instinct I had was firing as I made my way down. Every step was cautious, my eyes scanning constantly. I had no idea how many more traps might be waiting. I ended up reaching the main trail earlier than I expected. Soon after, I ran into a family who kindly let me use their phone to call for help. Needless to say, once I told my story, that trail was combed over by authorities. They didn't find any more traps, but they did find my abandoned tent and the metal container, which turned out to be filled with battery acid. It was suspended right over the trail, aimed directly downward. A small nail tied to the wire acted as a trigger. Step on the wire, the nail pops a lever, and the acid dumps straight onto the person underneath. It was homemade, but highly effective. The precision, the type of chemical, it chilled me to the bone. That wasn't thrown together by an amateur. It wasn't random. Whoever did that knew exactly what they were doing. And even worse, they knew how to do it without getting caught. I've often wondered, how did that person haul acid up into the mountains without being seen? The only explanation that makes any sense is that it was someone who knows those woods like the back of their hand. Someone who's been hunting there for years. Someone who has hidden supply spots stashed through the forest and taps into them whenever it's convenient. And above all, someone who sees hunting humans as a kind of sport. Since then, I've read a ton of similar stories from different trails across the US. I even found out about James Scher, a US Forest Service officer in Utah. In April 2012, he was doing a routine patrol along a popular scenic trail deep in the forest when he found a tripwire stretched between two trees at the entrance of a small deadwood shelter. He followed it and discovered a trap made of rocks and sharpened sticks, ready to fall if the wire was tripped. Another trap was set up at a second entrance to the shelter, a pit lined with sharpened sticks, covered by brush, and another tight tripwire set right in front of it. It was a dangerous, deadly setup. We all need to be more cautious and more alert out there. There are truly evil, twisted people in this world. This story didn't happen to me. It happened to my father over 35 years ago, deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, back when he was in his 20s and spent much of his free time hiking. He rarely speaks of it, and for years, all I knew were fragments passed down through my late uncle. But a few days ago, my father finally told me everything. I don't think he did it for closure. I think he wanted me to understand why some places should be left alone. Not that he wants to stop me from exploring these mountains, but he just wants to make it clear that if I do explore them, I should do so with respect for the people who came before and take all possible precautions. He was 24 when he and my uncle, who has since passed, set out on an 8-day hiking trip. They were aiming to reach a little-known ghost town tucked in an overgrown part of the mountains, a site whispered about by locals, said to produce strange noises at night. The kind of place that draws in the curious, the skeptical, and the naive. It was early spring. Cold enough at night to make you grateful for a fire, but warm enough during the day to hike comfortably. Not long before their trip, there had been news of a missing person, a man who had ventured into the same area alone 2 months earlier and never returned. A search was launched, but resources were limited back then, and the effort had long since ended. No one expected to find him alive. In fact, this part of the country is well known for its disappearances that often don't even make it to the public or get reported. My dad and uncle were eager, full of the kind of restless energy that makes you brave or stupid, depending on the outcome. They mapped their route carefully and began their ascent. The first few days were calm. The ruins were fascinating. Crumbled stone foundations, broken walls, remnants of another time. They explored, sketched layouts, and camped at a respectful distance. The forest had its own kind of rhythm, calm and steady during the day, restless and alive at night. You could hear the birds, which wasn't just peaceful, it was beautiful. But at night, that's when the real noise began. A whole set of insects that had stayed quiet during the day started their routines. On the third night, my father had a dream that he was being watched. Eyes in the dark, whispers brushing against his ears. He woke up in a sweat, heart racing, convinced someone had been standing just beyond the firelight. Obviously, it had just been a dream, or at least he thought it had been. So, after waking up and realizing everything was fine, he went back to sleep. My uncle seemed distant the next morning. He hadn't slept well either, and neither of them said it, but they both felt the same thing. They also noticed a set of footprints close to where they had camped. The tracks were fresh, clearly made during the night. That alone wasn't alarming. Lots of people visited those ruins and explored the mountains. So even though they hadn't run into anyone yet, it didn't mean they wouldn't eventually. What made them uneasy was feeling that way at night, a time when people are most vulnerable. And that's what disturbed them the most about the footprints. They had been left while they slept, when neither of them would have been able to see or hear a thing. That day, they were headed to explore some new ruins, and honestly, they were excited about it. Those were supposedly the ones that made the most noise at night. An old woman told them about it at a small grocery store while they were buying some fruit for the hike. She said that 248 years ago, an entire family had been sacrificed there, and ever since, the place had been abandoned. According to her, no one in their right mind went near it. They loved the story. They didn't believe in superstitions, and that was exactly why they had chosen to go. Up to that point, they hadn't seen or heard anything strange. No sounds, no movement, no signs of life, other than the kind that already lived in the forest and those footprints. They could already see the structure coming into view when, as they got closer, they started to hear a sound, like someone whispering and crying at the same time. A low, drawn-out kind of crying, full of pain. They immediately looked at each other and moved toward the noise. It clearly sounded like someone in distress. That's when, after their eyes adjusted to the dark, they saw a man in the corner of the ruins. He was shirtless, back turned to them. His skin was filthy, covered in scratches and bruises. His pants were torn and soaked in dried blood. He didn't react to them, didn't turn, but the sounds they heard were coming from him. They didn't understand why he was making those sounds, so they approached cautiously. That's when they were horrified by what they saw the man doing. He was biting his own arm, completely unaware that there were two other people there with him. As soon as my father and uncle realized the man wasn't well and could be dangerous, they backed away. Once outside, talking to each other, they started to think he might be the same man who had been reported missing in that area 2 months earlier. They couldn't just leave him there, but they also couldn't put themselves at risk. They left some food and water at the entrance of the ruins and started making their way down the mountain to alert the police and ask for help. When the search and rescue team found him, he was barely alive, severely dehydrated, his body covered in lacerations, burns, and old wounds. His arm was mauled, ravaged by his own teeth, and there was more blood in the ruin. Blood that wasn't his, but was later confirmed to belong to someone else. From what my father and uncle learned, the man never fully recovered, and in fact, no one ever knew what had happened to him during those 2 months he was out there, alone, without food or water. His wife said that sometimes, during the night, he would wake her up and tell her to hide, that the man was coming and she needed to hide. No matter how much she tried to calm him down with words or understand him, he only calmed down when she played along with the fantasy and hid. He never returned to being the same, and my father and uncle never went back to the Smokies.